It's time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Korn Myers. If you missed the first reading, just look in the description below for a playlist, and that will tell you what the whole book's going to be about. It's really, really fascinating. Also, my dear friend Christy from Smoky Mountain Food, Faith, and Fun left me a comment with a link in it where we could actually go hear Opal and see her ourselves. It's an old interview that's on YouTube here. The name of it is Opal Myers Remembering Catherine Marshall, because this book is sort of about the story of Christy, but really about Opal's life. So be sure to check that out. And if you've never been to Christy and Brooke's channel, Smoky Mountain Faith, Food, and Fun, you could definitely, I'll leave that link in the description below, and you could go visit them too. But thank you so much, Christy. Thank you for doing that and telling us, because I would have never even thought of, I should have, of searching for Opal here on YouTube. But thank you, Christy, for finding that. And I know all of you really enjoy it like I did. And especially after, I've read the book before, so as you begin to learn more about her and then to see her, you just love her. I mean, you'll love her from the book, but you'll just love her if you go and listen to her too. So I will link to that. For years, every time I saw Opal, she talked about having someone write the history of her ancestors and the events of her life. Confident that someone else would come along and jump at this opportunity to tell this story of this great mountain woman, I said nothing. Knowing that her years on earth were numbered, Opal started taping and jotting down the things she would one day want Lori, her 5-year-old granddaughter, to know. These tapes, along with a collection of handwritten letters, were all she had to pass on. Late in 1989, as her health was failing, I was inspired to take on the task of putting Opal's story on paper. With the project underway, we discussed the details of life as it was in her growing up years, attending the Ebenezer Mission School and Highland Institute, and life as it was later, the life of a woman dedicated to her family and the community, and most of all, committed to God. Here is her story through letters that share more than a history, but a legacy. This is the first chapter. Letter to Lori, 1986. If I should die before you're grown, I pray my love for you is known. Dear Lori, you are my youngest grandchild and so very special to me. I've always wished you lived closer to me so that I could see you more often and spend time with you while you were growing up. Just be able to sit down and talk. I used to sit on the porch and snap beans with my grandma Korn, and we would talk for hours. I loved being around her, and I knew that she loved me. I hope you know how much I love you. Your father left this community early in life to go off to where he could get a good job. Don't misunderstand me. I'm glad he has a good business, but I am sad that I never get to see you except at homecoming or decoration day or on other special occasions. Even then, it's just for a meal, and there are always so many people around that I can't talk to you about all the things that I want you to know about your family, your ancestors. Your ancestors have lived up in these mountains for many generations. They were hard-working, good people with a strong sense of right and wrong. And as children, if you knew what was good for you, you had sure better be doing what was right. Your ancestors were very poor by today's standards, but when everyone around you is poor, you don't pay that much attention to it. You just live your life every day and share what you have. You certainly don't have to have money to contribute to your community and help your neighbors, and that's exactly what we were brought up to do. People helped each other and did what had to be done. You didn't stop to think about it, you just did it because it was the right thing to do. My grandma Korn was like that. If you just could have known her, she was one of my favorite people. She was short and fat and had 13 children, and I wanted to be just like her. Well, I'm not quite as big as she was, and I can't say that I ever really wanted to have 13 children either, but I still wish to this very day that I had been able to be around her more. I love to listen to her stories of the old days. I'm so sorry she died before we ever got to do more things like that. I always wondered what she would have told me. I don't want it to be that way with you. I want you to know about your family's past, and I want you to be able to know me. But you are so young, too young to understand, even if we had the time now. All you know is that I love you and you love me. I'm 76 now, and by the time you are old enough to grasp the tales and legends that make up your past, I may not be here anymore. And I don't want you to feel that you've missed out by not hearing the old stories of days gone by. There are so many things that I would like to teach you. I want you to know how we did things when we were young, how we fixed our foods, how we made medicine from the plants around here, how we carried out our work and chores. I want you to know about the games we played. I'd like you to know about the values that were so vital in the old days. Nowadays, nobody seems to give those things much thought, but I'd like you to know how to recognize the things that are really important in life, like respect for others, keeping your promises, and caring for those in need. I'd like you to know and truly believe that you can be anything you want to be if you're just willing to work for it. Never give up on your dreams. I would like to be there as you're growing up to remind you of that, to encourage you. So many things to tell, and it's hard to remember them all at one time, so I'll just write you little notes now and then, or talk into this tape recorder like I am now, whenever I feel like it and have time. There's no use trying to keep this in any special order. Later, someone will come along who will put it all together, and then you will be able to know your heritage and find out about the things we used to do. I wish I could write or tape more at night when everything is quiet and there are no interruptions, but when I try, I get so sleepy that I just can't seem to stay awake. I imagine that's because I usually don't go to bed until 11 or 12 o'clock, and then I have to get up at 4:30 in the morning to heat water for your cousins, Barry and Benja's bath, so they can be ready to leave for school at 6 o'clock. Barry and Benja have lived with me since they were just young'uns, younger than you are right now as I share this. Heating bath water on the stove must seem strange to you. I know. You don't have to carry your water in from the spring and heat it. All you have to do is turn on a spigot and you have hot water, but I have to go down and dip the water out of the tub at Morgan Branch. I have a little spout, a pipe I pushed into the spring so that the gentle flow of water pours out of the spring right into the tub. That way, I don't have to climb up and down the bank, but I still have to tote the water from the branch. Totin', that's what my parents used to call carrying water, totin' water. Of course, usually Barry and Benja bring a big bucket of water up every night, so I don't always have to carry it in, but sometimes I do. Before the schools consolidated in the mid-50s, there were many small one-room community schools, and the children would walk to school. After the consolidation, all those schools were closed, and the children had to ride the bus into town. Before Barry and Benja were old enough to drive to school, I'd have to take my big old lantern and walk down to the end of Cliff Spring and wait there with them for the bus. In the wintertime, we'd nearly freeze to death waiting for that bus. When it finally came, I'd watch them get on and then I'd walk back to the house by myself. The bus carried them all the way around through Punkton and Piney Grove, all around up in that section, and then back into Del Rio, where they changed buses to go on to the high school in Newport. As soon as they were old enough, their uncle and their daddy got them a truck and gave them gas so they wouldn't have to stand out in the cold and spend all that time riding the bus. Well, you can tell from this tape by the time I get all my chores done and Barry and Benja are asleep and I'm able to sit down to write or talk into this recorder, I'm so tired that it seems like I start to ramble from one thing to the next until I just can't stay awake any longer. I don't know if you will ever hear this tape. If you do, you'll hear the chickens and that old rooster of mine a-crowing. That's part of this life up here too. You don't know much about chickens, but they're actually a lot of fun to have around. And that old rooster, That old rooster starts crowing every time he sees me sitting up here on the porch. Guess he thinks it's his job to wake people up and keep them awake. I like to hear him crow. Sometimes I prefer to sit out here on my porch like I am now and look at the trees and flowers and animals while I talk into this tape recorder and remember. I have a very good memory, especially for an old person. In fact, sometimes the past seems to come to life for me, and it's like it was only yesterday when I ran barefooted right through here playing tag with the other children. I like to think about the days of Christy and the mission people who came up into this impoverished, that's how Catherine Marshall described us, back mountain community. Our lives would have been so different if they had not been willing to come here to educate us. They taught the people, all of us, so much about health and about life. They taught us how to read, and they taught about God, how He loves us and cares for each of us, how He created us and has a purpose for our lives. They taught us that even though we were poor and lived way back up here in the mountains, we could still be anything we wanted to be and accomplish anything we were willing to work hard enough for. And I believed them. I still believe them. I want you to know all about the mission and the mission people who gave us hope. I guess, Lori, that one of the most important things that I have learned in my life is that it's really not how much you accumulate that makes you important or a somebody. It's what you do with your life and what you do with what you have that causes you to be a special person and to have a purpose. That's something people seem to forget when life is easy. Well, since I tend to ramble a good bit, I'll at least try to start at the beginning. The beginning, the birthing of Ebenezer Mission, was probably the most significant thing that's ever happened in these parts. There are many versions to the story of Ebenezer's beginning. Most of them are fairly close, but I guess after all this time, no one knows for sure exactly what happened. This is another version, and though there is no way to know how accurate it may be, it depicts the events in general order. Back just before the turn of the century, probably in the late winter or maybe the early spring of 1895, there was a young preacher, a circuit preacher. Chapter 2, Ebenezer Mission, 1895 to 1902. The circuit preacher. The circuit preacher was an important part of life back in these secluded mountains. He not only carried the good news of the Lord, but I reckon he was just about the only source of any news from the surrounding communities. I also imagine he was practically the only connection to the outside world, even though that world was merely a trip to the other side of the mountain, or at best barely a few miles away. Most circuit preachers traveled 100 miles or so on a regular route from one community to another. Some traveled on the back of a horse or a mule, but most traveled on foot, carrying their treasured Bible, a bedroll, and maybe a rifle. They would conduct meetings in houses along the way, but more than likely in a special building that doubled as a school and church and housed other community gatherings. They'd preach at funerals, baptisms, marriages, anywhere they got half a chance. In our back mountain area, the people were extremely poor, and there was no money to pay for the services of a circuit preacher. A place to sleep and food to take back to his family was probably his only earthly reward. I don't know a lot about who the circuit preacher was at that time or his exact route, but I do know that his circuit included the communities of Fairview, Edwina, Pig Trot, and several more. Whoever he was the preacher who had heard about someone wanting to start a mission church and boarding school or orphanage for boys in a mountain area where there was a great need. After talking with people in the various congregations he served, the preacher contacted the Moravian Church in Waterton, Wisconsin. Touched by the deep concern he expressed for his people, and the poverty and sickness that plagued them, the Moravians sent a representative to further explore the possibility of establishing a mission in this section of Tennessee. Every congregation was excited about the news. A mission here in this area would mean a great deal to the people. Why, there'd be someone to take in the young'uns that had no one to properly care for them. There would be clothes for those with none, and a real school taught by workers who would not only care for the children, but also for their entire families. There would even be classes so that the older ones could learn to read the good book for themselves. A mission would mean help and hope for a better life. Of course, the church-going people would welcome a mission, but no one was so naive as to think that everyone in the community would accept outsiders. Many would be too proud to listen to anyone, and most of them wouldn't be willing to change just because someone suggested they might need to do so. Grandma Korn and family. My grandparents on Papa's side were God-fearing people. Tolliver Joshua, known as TJ, and Suzanne Angeline Korn were a part of the Edwina congregation. Papa's family attended church every time the doors opened. Yes, sir, Grandpa Korn made sure of that. He didn't have to ask them, "Are you going to get ready to go to church?" or "Are you going?" They had to go, and they knew it. So everybody just automatically got up and got ready. There were no other choices about the matter. T.J. Korn and Suzanne Angeline Toby were married at the home of Will McMahon probably sometime in 1873, but the exact day is not known. Suzanne was one of 3 children born to Mary Ann Toby. Suzanne's family has always been a mystery. Whenever she spoke of her ma, she always called her Polly Ann, never Mary Ann or Mama. She was not called Grandma by the children either. No one knows why, nor is it known who her father was or anything about him for that matter, except that he was a scout during the Civil War. Those days left many scars and great devastations even in the hidden corners of these secluded back mountains. By 1895, Papa, Arthur Jackson, was the 4th of 11 children. First there was Mary, who was 20, then Nathan, who had only lived 14 days, Frank, 17, Papa, 16, Jonah, 14, Christopher, 12, Amanda, 10, Dora, 9, Howard, 6, Winnie, 4, and Martha, 2. Suzanne had quite a brood, but that was not at all uncommon in these days. Her last child, Flora, was born about 1.5 years later in 1896, giving her an even dozen. She was also carrying for TJ's father, Nathan Korn, who lived with them for several years before his death in 1902. Suzanne was truly an amazing woman. It's no wonder that I admire her so. Not only did she give birth to 12 children of her own and care for her father-in-law, but she also took in 4 of Grandpa's strays. No one knows, but he may have had a lot more than that. Jesse Korn, who was born July 30th, 1897, was the son of T.J. and Nan James. Grandpa also had 2 other children by her, and then there was a boy named Curtis by a different woman. Suzanne took them all in. Jesse and his 2 sisters were so poorly taken care of that they weren't much more than skin and bones when Suzanne took them into her home. The 2 girls died young. One was about 4, and the other died at about age 6. Curtis died young too. He was only about 5. Uncle Jesse was there until he went off and got married. Nathan Korn, who used to come to all the homecomings and died not long back, was one of Uncle Jesse's boys. Grandma was a good-hearted woman. She always felt that the child couldn't help what its ma and pa had done. Even when the child's own mother didn't want them or couldn't keep them, Grandma was there and she would take them in. We were never aware of any problems between them, or even if there was one caused by Grandpa's messing around. If my own pa had ever had children outside of marriage, that would have been a different story. Mama would have shot him dead. She never would have taken them in, I can tell you that right now. She would have taken in other young'uns, but not children of my pa. But the culture was different back here in the mountains. It was not all that uncommon for a man to have children by more than one woman, and his wife had little choice but to accept it as the way life was. There was also a lot of intermarrying within families. Whatever the situation was with Grandma and Grandpa, it never hindered their family's involvement in church or their excitement about the coming of the mission. We'll stop right there. That really kind of fascinating part, isn't it? Totally different time, I guess. In one way, maybe in one way it's not. I'm not sure, but I really enjoyed this first part of hearing Opal. It's from Opal's point of view, her letter to Lori. I hope that you did too. So many different things, and I wrote a bunch of them down, and then while I was actually reading it, I was like, why didn't I write that down? Why didn't I write that down? I probably can't remember though what it was that she was talking about now that I thought I should have wrote down. So from the very beginning, she's talking about her love of her grandmother, and describes her and how she loved to sit on the porch with her, and she really wishes that Lori could have that with her. And Lori doesn't live near her, and she knows that that's not going to happen. She lived near her grandmother, and so she knew that happened, and that's why it happened with her, but she knows it's not going to, so that's why she wants to write all this down for her dear sweet granddaughter, as she wants her to know everything. Now, there are other two grandchildren there. I don't know, as the book goes on, maybe we'll find out she has others. I can't remember. But Barry and Benja, they lived right with her, so they knew all that because they lived right with her. So they lived it every day. They understood, and they knew that. That love, though, for her grandmother, and then wanting to have the same relationship with Lori, even though it's kind of impossible, really reminds me of my grandparents, and then, of course, of Pap and Granny and Miss Cindy and Papa Tony and Nana and all Corey and Katie's grandparents, all of them. I remember when Pap, because he had suffered from heart disease, he kind of had a bout of it in his early 40s and had open heart surgery, bypass, and that cured him for 25 years. But then when it started coming back, it was more of a problem. Anyway, I can remember at one point he said he just prayed, I think he told Mama this, he didn't tell me, but that he just prayed the Lord would let him live to see, talking about his grandchildren. So he had 5 grandchildren, Ben and Mark and April from my brother Steve, and then Katie and Corey from me and Matt. And he just wanted to live to see, if he could just live to see the girls, the boys are older, the girls be 16 years old, then he would be satisfied, because he thought by the time you're 16 years old, you kind of have at least the foundation of what you're going to believe in your mind, and that he'd be satisfied with that. And then the boys would be even older, and he'd already know, he'd kind of just feel good about it. Well, he got to live longer than that. He died right before Corey and Katie graduated from college, so he got to live longer than that, which was a blessing. But it was that same love between the grandparent and the grandchild, and that Opal writes of. And then, of course, now, as a new grandmother, I'm really feeling that too. I want to, Ira and Woodrow are just babies, but I want them to know everything I know, which is not much, but I want them to know it. I really do. And also, kind of all through this first part, you can really if you listen to all the books, you'll know I've talked about this many times before, but the sense of place and the familial culture of Appalachia, you can really see that. That's why it's so important for Opal to tell her. She wants her to know, wants Lori to know about the family history and how all those generations live there, and she wants her to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. She wants her to know all of it. She wants her to know how it really was, and wants her to know how they lived, and really those passing down of stories. Appalachians are known to be storytellers. I think a lot of what I do is storytelling. Well, where does your stories often come from your family, and in Appalachia, often they may not even come from your immediate family, but maybe your great-grandpa's family, because they've been passed down to you, So you can really see that sense of place and the familial culture during this part. Now, that sense of place is, I love that Opal talks about in one part that, she can remember the past so well that it's almost like she can see herself, remember that it's right there, that was playing tag with her cousins and her family, her siblings, or whoever it was, and And then she talks about the chickens and she just sits and looks at the mountains and the flowers and the trees and all that. That all really plays into the sense of place. And even when she's talking about the spring, having to go down there and get the water, you can just tell that's just, she loves that place. It's all about her home, that sense of place, which is so strong in the mountains of Appalachia. If you've watched my videos any length of time at all, you know that I certainly have that too. And then you got to love just the instruction that she's given her too, is that, talking about all the right thing to do. Now, there at the end, doesn't sound like everybody did the right thing to do, talking about the men, but that it's the right thing to do. Like so often in life, you have to have your, whatever you believe, and of course I'm not telling you what to believe. You have to believe what you believe. I believe what I believe. That's how wonderful we all get to make those decisions. But I think that your life is richer if you do have those standards that you believe in and that you're not willing to stray from them. She says, because it's the right thing to do. Whatever it is, ever how you believe, but it's the right, because it's the right thing to do. It's just the right, it's the right thing that you've got to do. So I really love that. And going back to the spring part, I love that, she's saying, you probably think this is weird. I've got to go down here to the spring. I can't just turn on the spigot. But even in going to the spring, she had figured out how to make it easier on herself. So instead of having to get in the spring, she had made her a little pipe so that it run into a tub. So then she could just go to the tub. She didn't have to get all the way in the spring. So even that, you can just tell Opal was just proud of that she had that tub and she didn't have to get all the way in there. She didn't have to get, I'm sure it kept her from getting wet and dirty. Anyway, I love that part, that just she's really proud of that. You can tell, really pleased that she's got it. Really interesting about the circuit preacher, and that the circuit preacher, brought the news, and then of course he was the person that married people, that buried people, that done whatever, baptized people, that did whatever they needed to do. That was the other one of the things I was going to remember. There is a footnote in that part where she kind of says there's different stories about how the mission actually come to be. So let's see what this says. This says, the birthing of Ebenezer has become a legend with many versions, though through meticulous research, Marilyn Mitchum has documented the authentic dates and events in the history of Ebenezer Mission. See Important Date in Ebenezer Mission History by Marilyn D. Mitchum, Appendix B. So I guess that's in the back there. But anyway, so there's different stories about how it actually happened. But anyway, so you could find that book if you wanted to have more information about that. I really loved this first part, though. Wasn't it just so interesting? Oh, I know one of the other things now I thought that reminded me was about Benja and Barry, was about the consolidation. That's come up in our last book that we read from Jessie Stewart, and I've shared my thoughts again. My thoughts don't have to be anybody else's thoughts, but how that I'm for community schools. But I can't help but think she had to have them ready to leave to go to school at 6 o'clock, and then she had to walk down there with the old lantern, she said, and wait with them till the bus come. If they wasn't traveling so far, she wouldn't have had to do that. They could have left more at 7:30 or something like that. But so that's like she said, they went all over that section, she called it, all over that section, picking up kids, and then went on to Del Rio, and then they had to get on the bus to go to Newport. But then eventually what happened is their daddy and their uncle got them a vehicle to drive, so they didn't have to have that long bus ride and get up so early, I'm sure. That was the other thing I was thinking of. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this part as much as I do, and I hope you'll go, the video that I talked about that Christy left the comment about, I'm so glad that she did that, because it's just, you just love Opal. Now, I already love her just reading this, but then you go watch her talk, and you just fall in love with her. And how wonderful that she did this for Lori. What a glorious present. But then how wonderful that we all get to read it, too. She did it for everyone, really. I mean, for her granddaughter, of course. That was her main concern. But how wonderful that we get to read it and learn from it and enjoy it and get a peek into her life. And we couldn't have done that without Barbara League. So again, I'm just so thankful for Barbara for doing this labor of love and for being a friend to Opal all those years, her and her family, and really doing this. What a wonderful, wonderful thing. And you can tell I really love this book. I'll probably go on like this about every time I read, but I really hope you enjoy it too. And I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me what you liked about this part. And I hope you'll drop back by next Friday so we can see what happens next.